Today on Straight Talk Africa, land reform or land grab. For many, the issue of land ownership is a matter of life and death. Can governments make meaningful reforms that benefit Africans in a manner that does not translate into what critics call land grabs? That's coming up next right here on Straight Talk Africa. Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa, live from the Voice of America studios here in Washington. I am Shaka Sali.
And hello to all our viewers and listeners on the continent and elsewhere. I'm Ayan Bior, your social media reporter.
Today, we'll talk about politics of land reform in Africa.
And coming up later, our audience has weighed in on our topic through emails, Facebook, and Twitter comments. And we'll reveal some of them ahead on Straight Talk Africa.
Millions of people in Africa are at risk of starvation and famine. And while famine is not entirely a land reform issue, governments can propose reforms as a significant part in the solution. My colleague Paul Cisco has more.
Land reform. Land reform involves the changing of laws, regulations, or customs regarding land ownership. Land reform may consist of a government-initiated or government-backed property redistribution, generally of agricultural lands. Access to land, ownership of land, is an increasing problem in Africa, the result of population growth and tenure reforms. Land tenure refers to the political, economic, social, and legal structures that determined land management and ownership. In Uganda, the issue of land ownership is literally one of life and death, according to one chief. President Yoweri Museveni wants to abandon traditional land ownership rights by introducing a more modern national system with more land under government control and regulation. This month, South African President Jacob Zuma called for constitutional changes and land reform policies that could alter ownership, moving it from corporate and mostly white entities to the South African government without compensation. Zuma won support for the so-called willing seller, willing buyer land reform policy in the 1990s. But by the government's own account, that and most of South Africa's land reform projects have failed to make ownership more equitable. Land governorship remains a huge issue in Zimbabwe, where President Robert Mugabe has been in power since 1980. Analysts disagree as to whether or not the seizure of land from white farmers in 2000 has been a significant factor in Zimbabwe's subsequent and continuing economic decline. Calls for land reform are popular, but decades of talk and reforms tried and even adopted have brought few, if any, recognizable benefits for generations of Africans and their families. The 18th Annual Land and Poverty Conference is underway this week at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., with experts and interested parties discussing much-needed recommendations, reforms, and governance issues aimed at making land ownership more equitable and farms and fields more productive. In fact, more and more African families are entirely landless. Ugandan women provide 80% of the work and own 7% of the land. Worldwide, there is an accelerating movement of people from rural regions to urban centers that has been underway for more than 50 years. City dwellers need jobs, of course, and food, and a place to live. Many experts believe the day of the subsistence farmer will soon be gone. Worldwide, commercial farming is on the increase. Investing in land ownership is limited because of the insecurity of those investments, particularly in Africa. Sufficient fertile agricultural lands exist in Africa to feed the continent and export food to much of the world. Ethiopia fed peoples across the Horn of Africa and beyond. But insecurity, poor governance, corruption, and the absence of equitably established land reform policies are part of the problem and significant factors contributing to what the United Nations says may be the greatest humanitarian crisis since 1945. The looming starvation of more than 20 million people in Africa, North Africa, and the Middle East. Paul Cisco, VOA News, Washington.
Thanks, Paul, for that report. Joining us here in our Washington studio, Jacques Bahati, policy analyst at the Washington-based Africa Faith and Justice Network, Dr. Frank Byamujisha, a former World Bank expert on land reform, is currently an independent consultant and Ms. Arch Mariamu El Mawe, Principal Secretary, Kenyan Ministry of Land, Housing and Urban Development, was expected to participate in this show, but have just been told that due to circumstances beyond her control, she could not be able to join us. Well, I have to say to you two gentlemen that I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host the two of you on Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you,
Shaka,
for having us.
You're most welcome. Later in the program, we'll give you, the audience, a chance to call and talk with our guests. The number to call is 202-619-3111. US country code is 1. Let me come to you first, Dr. Frank Byamujisha. You've been attending the World Bank Land and Poverty Conference this week, correct?
Correct.
How would you briefly characterize it?
I'm glad to report that this year's conference was the most highly attended. We have 1,300 people attending the conference.
Really?
From all over the world. That highlights the importance of land reform to the people's lives, both in developing countries and developed countries as well.
What is particularly unique or special about this particular 18th edition of the Land and Poverty Conference?
I think over time, the global community has started to pay more attention to how land is managed and how land is used. Following the Millennium Development Goals, they have now come up with sustainable development goals, and land reform is an important element of it. So now, even those that are not interested in agriculture, have started showing more interest in land reform, because as investors, they look for areas where they can invest and get a great return in the event that they cannot get good returns in non-agricultural areas. And where do they go? They go to countries where there is a lot of land. And to access that land, it means it has to be acquired from those that have it. And the whole process of acquiring that land, investing in it, and ensuring that you get return from that investment and take it back home to where you reside, really falls under the umbrella of land reform.
Very interesting. Jacques, what about you? What about some people who say that, it is really about talking the talk, but that these conferences, frankly, do not add very, very much value?
Shaka, what is at stake here is enormous. Land is one of the resources that we have. Nobody is going to live in the air, and unfortunately, there is no justice that is being delivered by these big organizations like the World Bank. Instead, they are always serving those who are powerful. And that's why the Africa Faith and Justice Network have been closely watching what the World Bank and the IMF are doing, and we have said, no, that is not, it doesn't represent the farmers who really need this land and need the money, at least if you want to invest, pay good money. So they are serving those who have been served, and we don't like it.
That is very interesting, because in fact, I do have a book right here. It is titled The Tyranny of Experts, Economists, Dictators, and the Forgotten Rights of the Poor. It is written by William Eastery, a professor at the New York University. He worked for several years at the World Bank and was actually involved in some of those projects. You think that he comes from very strong ground?
Well, the multinationals and the companies that they set up, different countries set up different companies and special interest. They can hire whoever they want.
They can hire whoever they want.
Whoever they want, as long as there is a check in their pocket. Shaka, we have evidence of people who are agreeing to make deals for multinationals. As long as they pay them, they don't care if their compatriots are cheated for life and for generations. And that is not okay.
Very interesting. Frank, you worked for the World Bank
Correct.
for very, very many years, about
30
3
years.
decades.
3 decades plus.
I'm sure that you know William Easterly.
Yes, I know him. I used to work with him.
He raises some very interesting points that, in fact, I think some of them probably actually may have made him fired from the World Bank.
Well, you know,
He basically says, frankly, the World Bank is not on the side of the ordinary farmer. It is on the side of some specific power groups, including multinational corporations.
but, you know, times have been changing. In the old days, if we start with colonialism, the attitude towards the colonized countries by the colonizers was different from what we have today. Now, when you look at the situation from the view of an investor goes to invest in agriculture, let's say in Africa. He's interested in making a profit. Now, people that are used to agriculture, know agriculture well, know that you can't invest in agriculture and get a profit in 1 year and go home and enjoy your money. No, you need to look at it in the long term. And indeed, from 2008, 2009, when there was an international financial crisis and commodity prices going up, there were many speculators who went to invest in Africa. Big investors from New York, from the Middle East, thinking they would make quick money from agriculture, and they have had their fingers burnt. They have come back home. So now there is an increased realization that to really make money as an investor, you need the cooperation of the local people so that you can invest for the long haul. You can invest in a time frame of 30 to 50 years. And to do that, you need cooperation of the people. Otherwise, if you really undermine them, compromise them, exploit them, they would throw you out. They would cut your corn, your maize, if you are producing maize, or your bananas, or your pineapples. So I don't agree with you that investors go there to exploit. No, they go there to make profit. But to make profit in the long term, they need cooperation of the local people. They need land rights to be protected. They need land that has a title in it. They need to have a counterpart that is a legal entity, so that when they enter into a contract with that legal entity, the contract can stick. Otherwise, if it's not a legal entity, let's say is a village chief that is not legally recognized, or is an individual that is not legally recognized, he can sign a contract and then tomorrow walk away, and you see other people demanding for their land and telling you as a foreign investor to get out.
Well, I would a little bit bring in another perspective. There are many places in Africa where land is considered as a community, where it is community owned. Now, you want, and the World Bank is gaining the trust of these countries, telling them to get these community-owned lands to become individual families owned by implementing these programs of land titles. Now, that is indeed a pathway to enable these so-called investors to come in and then deal with different families. Now, why not let the people own the land and come up with different ideas on how the land can benefit the community as a whole, instead of trying to take the land from individual, which in the long run is practically a pathway to land grabbing.
We'll come to that, of course, because in fact there are certain specific examples, especially in Ethiopia, in Gambela region, where, of course, the government says that people voluntarily left their neighborhoods in order for this land to be given to investors. Now we will pause for a short break, and we want to remind you that Straight Talk Africa is now streaming on Facebook. Just enter the keyword Straight Talk Africa and watch our show live. And don't forget to share it with your friends. Also, we are on Twitter, and we are tweeting live. Follow us at VOA Shaka. That's VOA Shaka, and joining in on today's discussion with your questions and comments. Don't forget to use the hashtag VOAAfricaLand. We'll put some of your tweets on air later in the show. We'll be right back with you, so please don't go away.
We are able to touch on things that are important to people on an everyday basis. We hope that our viewers are getting inspired when they watch our show. They're getting a view of the world from a different perspective, things that perhaps are not in their immediate vicinity. Today, I could put in on the show something that is a little different, a little unique, and this gives me that, inspiration to come to work.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. What is your opinion about today's topic? Call us at 202-619-3111. U.S. country code 1. When you call, remember the following. Ask only one question. Keep your comment brief and turn down the volume on your radio or television. Now let's return to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther Githui. And of course, this is Straight Talk Africa, coming to you live from Washington. Yes, Frank, I was talking about the specific example in Ethiopia, which you probably must be aware of.
Yes, I know Ethiopia. I've been to Gambela.
Some of these individuals, in fact, have been interviewed, and they have said they did not volunteer to relocate. But the government went there with security forces and what have you, and essentially kicked them out. Is that land reform or land grab?
Obviously, that's not land reform. And at the same time, I wouldn't exactly call it land grab. Grabbed by who?
So what is the difference really between land reform and land grab?
Okay, in the case of Ethiopia, if land belonging to the community was actually taken by the state, by the government, and then leased out to foreigners, it's actually the state of Ethiopia taking land from its own people. And actually that's a good example of really what has been going on. While foreign investors, by and large, are being blamed to be behind land grabbing, more than half of the land that has been taken by investors has been taken by domestic investors. Obviously, many of them in collusion with the state. So really, we shouldn't be looking at foreigners as land grabbers.
So who is the state supposed to represent? Whose interests, frankly?
Now the state is supposed to represent the interests of the people. In a democratic system, the people should put pressure on the government to ensure that it holds the government accountable to protect the rights of the local communities. Now, the cases you have been quoting actually are quite many, not only in Ethiopia, but also in Sudan.
What about Uganda, in the district of Mubende?
In Mubende, I hear it's also going on. But underlying all of this, Shaka, is the fact that most of this land is communally owned. In fact, 70% of land in sub-Saharan Africa is communally owned. And to make it worse, it's not registered. It's not documented. While most African countries now have in their laws recognition of communal land rights, but they are not documented. So when a government wants to build a road or a pipeline or to exploit major minerals, it basically takes away land from people, behaving like it was doing in the colonial period, as if it is public land. But if it were to be registered under a title, in fact, it doesn't have to be individual title. It can be a community title. A group of individuals in a group, in a village, can register themselves as a cooperative. In the case of Uganda, the law allows the groups to be registered as communal land associations. In the case of Kenya, they can be registered as trusts. And once they are a legal entity, then they can get a title for their land after the land is demarcated.
Right.
But obviously providing for internal rules
Right.
of operation,
Right.
which by and large in most places are governed by the so-called internal bylaws. And this is what was done very well in Mexico, where more than 60% of Mexico's land is owned by communities called ejidos.
So, Bahati, what do you really think? Yeah, what do you really think needs to be done in order, frankly, to correct the situation, so that at the end of the day, it is ordinary people, frankly, who own the land, who should benefit?
Yes, in these cases that Dr. had been describing, where government takes the land and then gives to an investor. Let's put this in the context. International politics is what allows us to characterize this as a land grab, because the government takes it from the people through international politics, through these investors who want the land, because they have sent their people, they know the land is near the river and so on, it's fertile and so on. Oh, take it and then you give it to us. So it's really obvious. The title given to a community. Why do we need necessarily to have this title? What I'm trying to say here is that there is an international politics that is trying to take advantage of the people who are not informed, government that are not responsible, to try to acquire this land while it's possible.
So you are basically saying that governments, in fact, are perhaps abdicating their responsibility, frankly, of being there for their own people.
That's it.
And cooperating with multinational corporation.
Yes.
In order to exploit their own people.
Indeed, that's
what
so.
you are saying.
That's the fact.
So is it possible that it is therefore perhaps not the government really, because after all the government means really the people? Is it possible that there are some elements within some of these governments who are in fact collaborating with multinational corporations to exploit their countries?
Shaka, government means the people. Let's take Africa. Government by the people? I don't know many African countries where government of the people is there.
Well, of course, you know Abraham Lincoln used to characterize democracy as a government of the people, by the people, for the people.
That's it.
But there are some people who think that the reality on the ground, as reflected, frankly, in Africa, is a government of some people, by some people, for some people. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with this. What we need is to bring more awareness about this issue. Our land is not growing in size, period. And we are growing in numbers. You might want to have benefit today, but what about the generations to come? Why lease land for very little for so long when we know, Shaka, if you look at the population of some of our countries, 1960s, before the when the colonial masters were there, and today we have doubled, and we need land where to expand. For some countries, it's not even 100 years. Now, why are you leasing land for very little for 50 years, 60 years? It doesn't make sense to me.
Very interesting. But Frank, you obviously have a lot of experience in this area because, of course, working at the bank for 30 years and specifically working, in fact, on land reform and development or lack of it. I mean, I have looked at studies which show that half of the world's usable, arable, uncultivated land is in Africa.
Correct.
But at the same time, ironically, it is in fact Africans who are the poorest on this planet Earth. Most of them, in fact, have hardly access to 2 meals a day. Why?
That's very absurd. And when you look at developed countries, or even countries that are really developing fast and soon becoming developed, like Korea, South Korea, like Taiwan, China, and Vietnam, those have gone through land reforms that have assured two things. One, access to land by its citizens, all citizens, big and small, rich and poor. And secondly, protected their land rights.
So they have policies, frankly, which one would characterize as reflections of social, economic justice for all.
Correct, correct. But the political dynamics basically arose out of the Second World War. They realized that unless they developed their agriculture by giving equal opportunity to all citizens, there is no way they are going to become strong nations and be able to defend themselves against the Third World War, leave alone the stomachs. Now, coming back to Africa, we have half of usable and cultivated land, 200 million hectares in sub-Saharan Africa. But even before thinking about foreign investors, look at Africans themselves.
Right.
Take an enlightened country like Ghana. 60% of Ghanaian farmers own and cultivate less than 1 hectare, 60%. And of course, 1 hectare is not enough to be able to feed the family and get a surplus.
Are you saying that the other land is fallow?
The other land, you know, some of it is taken by, 40% of the farmers, but actually they take up between 1 hectare and 5 hectares. Above.
In a lay person's language, what is that?
If you want it in acres, you multiply by 2.5. So 5 hectares would actually be like 13 acres. For a high value crop, that's quite significant. For ranching, that is not. For plantation crops, that's not enough.
Just like cocoa, for example.
Yeah, cocoa, yeah, that's, that's enough, but not enough to give a farmer enough income to buy a motorcycle, to be, to upgrade from being a peasant to being a middle income earner. So really, when we talk about commercialization, a farmer needs to increase the amount of holding from 1 hectare to 5 to 10 hectares.
Becoming the rich peasant, the yeoman.
And yet Ghana has surplus land, a lot of surplus land. You are familiar with Zambia. Zambia has 10 million hectares of usable and cultivated land. And yet, about 70% of Zambian farmers cultivate less than 2 hectares.
What about South Sudan, where there is almost virtually nothing actually is under cultivation?
It's even worse. Now, the point I'm trying to highlight is that in Africa, we have a lot of communally-owned land, but allocating that land to users, both the community people within the community and outside the community within the country are not developed. In Ghana, they are allocated by chiefs, but chiefs don't have enough capacity to do it. In Zambia, the same by chiefs. They don't have a capacity to do it. The only African country that has done pretty well to develop that capacity is Botswana. And I would encourage other African countries to look at how Botswana has done it, so that although they haven't done it perfectly, there are a few things they can learn from Botswana.
Botswana, of course, is very unique because I was just reading that the incumbent president, Seretse Khama, Ian Khama, has signaled that, in fact, he's stepping down next year, and the vice president is taking over. So they have probably no problem.
Wonderful. I mean, that highlighted the importance of governance.
Predictable.
And predictability. So overall governance also extends to land reform.
And peaceful transition is, of course, of power from one individual, one regime to another. You're tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll have more of a discussion in a moment, including our social media segment. So please, don't go away.
The lyrics could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African Beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. Call us now with your questions and comments. The number is 202-619-3111 and the U.S. country code is 1. Call us direct and we'll call you right back. Remember to turn down the volume on your radio or television and keep your comments brief. Now back to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Estegidi Uwad, and welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, live from Washington. It's time to bring in my colleague and social media reporter, Ayen Bior. Take it away, Ayen.
Thanks, Shaka. The World Bank says that Africa needs to reform its systems for buying land and selling land and invest aggressively in urban infrastructure to create jobs, end poverty, and reduce high living costs. This leads us to our question of the week, which asks, with the unprecedented wave of people moving into towns and cities to pursue their hopes and dreams, how can Africa execute land reforms? Well, before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for using our social media platforms to communicate with us. And another reminder that we are tweeting live today. Use the hashtag #VOAAfricaLand. And if you haven't yet, please follow us at VOA Shaka. And speaking of it, let's go to a tweet from Otega Esemwede, who tweets, if only we could get through the greediness of the wicked politicians and tribal rulers. This reminds me of South Africa. Well, we have another tweet from Emmanuel Kachele, who tweets, to manage land properly, we should solve border conflicts, tribalism, unfriendly pastoralism, and equal inheritance. And now to our comment of the week from Facebook fan Fami Melekebu in Malawi, who writes, only the government and city assemblies should be given mandates to distribute land. There should be a strict policy that within families, individuals should not acquire multiple land parcels. This restriction is needed to prevent families in the same area from being greedy. Well, let's go to another comment from Facebook fan Herbert Warigara Jr., who writes, Land Reform Authority should be given only to local leaders who know about the land challenges in their respective areas. Issues can be better sorted out that way. And finally, our last Facebook comment comes from Isaac Wilson, who writes, the World Bank should advise African governments to invest in rural infrastructures to eradicate the challenges that prevent rural youth from migrating to cities. Projects that improve rural infrastructure will create jobs and improve living conditions, education, health, and communication. What is good for urban dwellers is also good for rural dwellers. Now, a reminder that we appreciate all the audience feedback, so please keep them coming. And if you're a new fan, drop us a line at africatv@voanews.com. Once again, our email address is africatv@voanews.com, or post your comment on our Facebook page. Enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa. Interact with our show as it's streaming live. Be sure to visit us online at voaafrica.com, or you can join our YouTube channel. Sign up to VOA TV to Africa and follow us on Twitter at VOA Shaka. A reminder that the show is streaming live every Wednesday. Go to VOA Straight Talk Africa TV program page on our website, or simply watch us live on your mobile device. Just download the VOA mobile app. Now let's take a look at what's on tap for next week's program. On the next Straight Talk Africa, 20 million people are suffering from a hunger crisis, and up to 2/3 of the population of Nigeria, South Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen possibly threatened by famine. An in-depth discussion on the international call for action on the next Straight Talk Africa. Well, Shaka, that's all for today's social media segment. You and the guests have a lot of social media comments to get to. Back to you.
Yes, indeed, Ayen, thank you so much. Welcome back to our discussion on the politics of land reform in Africa. Our guests are Jacques Bahati, Dr. Frank Byamujisha, and Ms. Marimu Erumawe was expected to join us, but unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond her control, she could not join us. Well, gentlemen, your reaction?
Yes, I would like to comment on the greediness of leaders. I just came from Ghana, 2 weeks in a village working with the chiefs.
It was not a conference?
No, it was not a conference. It's field work.
Right.
talking to people, doing town hall meetings, house by house, and calling people through the traditional means.
What were some of the important things that you people were talking about?
So there is this, Indian company that have gone to Ghana in Volta region, and
did it simply go there, or it was invited
there was
by
a
the
broker.
government?
Certainly there was a broker who is Ghanaian and spoke to the paramount chief. The paramount chief took a couple, three people within the hierarchy of the chiefs, and they signed off the community's land without the consent of the families. Knowing the structure of these of the Ghanaian system, you are the paramount chief, there are sub-chief, and under the sub-chief there are other chiefs, and then you have the families, and the families' land are known. So some of these families say, we are not interested in leasing our land, period. And the paramount chief is saying, oh, well, Ghana, nothing to say. I have a copy of the lease here. And the lease, it says that there is conflict. The parties further agreed that the Volta Regional Land Commission resolved that the land dispute between the families of Bator and Dorfo traditional area, and that both parties shall accept the verdict of the commission. About the land dispute, they are signing off land that is being disputed. How come? That is land grab. You are not supposed to go and say, I'm going to invest in the land, when you know the family, some of the families have told you, we don't want to invest. These investors are going to Africa saying, oh, we can solve the hunger program. No, we don't believe you. 70% of the food we eat in Africa, it comes from small landowners. What we need is for the government in Africa to create the conditions for our farmers to be able to see farming as a lucrative effort. That's all. You go to many places in Africa, there is no road. Where I come from, a bucket of tomatoes.
Where do you come from?
I come from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Around Goma?
Yes. And in Ghana, where I was, on the road, you can see buckets of tomatoes and sweet potatoes and so on. Very cheap. So we need these infrastructures to take the products of the farmers into the centers, into the cities, where they can make more money. We don't need the big investors to feed Africa. We don't think so. Let's create the conditions and improve.
I see.
Improve the agriculture system.
Your reaction, Dr. Byamujisha?
I'm glad you picked the example of Ghana, because it's quite a classical one. Ghana is a special country in terms of land management. So special to the extent that even the colonial government was unable to take away land from the people and give it to settlers.
From the Asantehene?
Yep. Why? Because they had chiefs who were so strong and working closely with their people. That
very powerful, really. Kings, really.
Very powerful kings. Even the king and the queen of England would not be able to take over that land. Now, after independence, Ghana's constitution made chiefs even more powerful to the extent that they are responsible for land. However, they are only trustees, they are custodians. However, as custodian trustees, they are the people responsible for allocating land, both as rental land and long-term leases. Customer land cannot be sold. Chiefs cannot even sell it. No, they lease it in return for a gift. Now, what is interesting, though, is that because that chieftainship in Ghana has not been codified in a way that people can hold their chiefs accountable. That's why you hear cases like he's talking about, where actually chiefs are taking advantage of their people to lease land to whoever, to whoever they want. And the government of Ghana can't come in and discipline the chiefs. No, they are powerful. So that's one case where chiefs actually can be greedy and can actually be as bad as government. However, in the case of Ghana, actually it's a few chiefs. It's a few chiefs that are greedy. By and large, most of the chiefs are still reasonably good. And that's why land grabbing in Ghana has not taken place as much as you would see in Ethiopia, Liberia, Mozambique, or Sudan.
Very interesting.
Yes,
So,
you know, I have, when I was in Ghana, I was on television and on the radio.
Yes.
People are calling in as they listen, as we bring them information about land grab, and be aware, oh, I am a victim. How can I get out of it? Land grab has taken hold in Ghana in a way that you do not understand. Because, let me tell you, an American company, Heracles Farms, 2008, acquires land in Volta region in Breniwasi. $5 per hectare per year for 50 years, renewable 25.
So, Bahati, you've been on the ground. You've seen the problems. Do you have any advice or strategy that could help restore those people's rights?
Shaka, first of all, in terms of strategies, we have to understand that land grab is a fact. That is number one. Information. Be aware that your land has value and that the value is going to go up. The land is not going to increase in size, but we are increasing in numbers. Third, you can become a shareholder.
Talk to me, yes.
Let them come, tell them my land has value is what I'm putting down to be a shareholder in this company. For the life of the investment, why not? But they don't agree to this principle. And in addition, we know that there are very toxic materials that are going around Africa. Our people need to be aware that the toxic dumping on the continent of Africa has yet to be exposed. Therefore, when you lease land, put prohibitions that you cannot bury anything under my ground. Because currently, some researchers are saying toxic waste trade has become more lucrative than arms trade. So we are telling them, put those prohibitions into your land lease. Also, we have pollution of the environment, usage of prohibited pesticides. Whereas the land is there, then you can use the water that is underground and the rivers.
I see.
So you become landowners of what? Nothing.
Very interesting. Dr. Byamugisha.
Yes, Shaka.
Land experts like you say that for the last 50 years, only 10% of Africa's rural land is recorded in public land registry.
Correct.
You alluded to that, a little bit earlier.
Yes.
Why have African governments not prioritized the registration of land to protect the property rights of their people? And the other question is, do you get the sense, or are there any indications of positive change in the last 10 years or so?
Basically, when African countries became independent, the initial years were a continuation of the land policies of the colonial regimes.
The same.
Now, colonial regimes were registering land,
yes,
primarily for colonial settlers, for establishing local administration, towns and whatever they needed, roads and so on. And thirdly, to meet the needs of missionaries.
Missionaries? Why missionaries?
Because the missionaries were part and parcel of the political colonization.
The colonial system.
Yeah. So they had to assure the settlers land. They had to assure the
especially the settler colonies like Kenya, like Rhodesia.
Yes. In others where there were a lot of mosquitoes and malaria, and they were saved, they couldn't go there.
That is why Nkrumah, in fact, one time said that they should have built a mosquito monument.
Correct. So basically, land titling was targeted to a narrow group of people. Secondly, it was for individually owned land, individual land rights. So when African countries became independent, the knowledge they had, the surveyors who had trained at the time were trained and geared towards offering land titles only to individuals. And yet, most of African land is communally owned.
Communal, correct.
Yeah.
Well,
So, yeah.
you know, time, of course, happens not to be our best ally, but we'll come back to that point.
Yes.
A reminder that you are tuned into Straight Talk Africa. To participate in our discussion, please call us at 202-619-3111. US country code is 1. We'll continue our discussion in a moment, so please, don't go away.
Today's youth are not just the next generation of African leaders, they are today's leaders. And this is the time to invest in them, today, not tomorrow. So let's connect, let's engage with each other on issues that will transform our societies. Innovation, leadership, entrepreneurship, things that you're doing to move the continent forward, to make you the greatest generation that Africa has known. It's Upfront every Wednesday, 17:30 UTC, right here on the Voice of America.
If you like today's show, please write and tell us what you think or give us some suggestions. Be sure to tell us what station you're tuned into. Our address, Straight Talk Africa, Voice of America, 330 Independence Avenue Southwest, Washington, D.C. 20237 USA. Or send us an email at africatv@voanews.com. Log on to our website at voaafrica.com. Or post your comments on Facebook. Keywords Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther Gidi-Ewart. And of course, this is Straight Talk Africa, coming to you live from Washington. I have to apologize from the deepest bitter part of my Kabale heart and soul, frankly, because I had to interject, obviously because there's no democracy in Studio 52. Because when a producer says you have to go, Shaka, you have to go.
You have to go.
So I hope that you'll find some space in your beautiful heart. Forgive me for that.
No, we understand.
Could you please pick up from where you left and conclude your point?
Yeah, the point I was making that most of the land in Africa was communal in the 60s. And over and above that, land disputes were very limited. So land tenure security was very firm. There was no threat on ownership of land. And so there was no hurry to title land. But through the 70s and 80s, land started gaining value, land disputes started going up, and a need was felt to title land. Unfortunately, Africa had not trained people, developed methodologies to title land very cost effectively. And that's why you basically have only 10% of land registered in Africa.
Terrific. Let's go to the lifeline of the show, which are the telephone callers. I gather that there is a Cliff from the Republic of Uganda. Good evening, Cliff. You're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Good evening, Ndugu Shaka. How are you?
I'm hugely terrific. What is your question, Cliff?
I go to Dr. Biamugisha. Dr.
Well, I'm afraid it looks like there is a connection problem. There is a connection problem. I could not hear the answer from Cliff, the question from Cliff. Let me come to you, Mr. Bahati, and talk to me, please.
Yes,
you come from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yes.
Which is, I think, the second largest country in the land mass on the African continent, incredibly fertile.
Yes.
But unfortunately, a lot of people, frankly, very poor. Women, I'm told, probably actually produce more than 90% of the food in that country.
Yes.
Do you happen to know, for example, how much percentage of land women own in your country?
Shaka, the discussion about land ownership, all that, have to be taken with some caution because of traditions. If I am married to your sister, and I have land as an inheritance from my father, it's her land because she's my family. So I found some discussion about this as a Western way of just trying to, again, put us one against the other. My mother never felt like she's landless. Honestly. So for me, that debate is mute.
But there are some legitimate cases where, for example, a woman is married to a man, they have plenty of land and what have you, and unfortunately the man dies, and after the man dies, the family of the man kicks the woman out of the house, out of the land.
An exception to the rule.
Really?
Yes. Honestly, that man who kicks out this woman, who has, by virtue of her marriage into the family, she is the family. So when she's kicked out of the land and the house, that is illegal. That is illegal. So honestly, that is a dysfunction family. My own family. We have a widow in my family.
Illegal based on what? Customary law or what?
Customary law, or I believe in Congo, I believe the law protects the woman from this kind of behavior. So personally, I believe that...
and are those laws enforced?
Shaka, let me go back just to customary law. Okay, we as Africans, when you marry, the woman you marry is a landowner because she is your family.
Correct.
And if you do not believe in this African concept that is known by everybody, what kind of man are you, what kind of family are you, that is where I'm going to leave it.
But isn't that, frankly, based on the rule of thumb, quote-unquote, gentleman's agreement?
I do not disagree that if you are marrying, you can put some clause, or the government, in this case, they should protect the women and say, you know, when you marry, what you own with this woman belongs to her too. So don't mess up, don't try to oppress her if you die before her. That would take care of some of these issues, Shaka.
What about you, Frank? Dr. Byamugisa, same question?
I'm really shocked that my brother Bahati could speak like that.
Why?
If he's married to your sister, by implication, your sister is an owner of the land that he owns.
It is true.
Okay, if it is true, would you agree that the land that you and your wife own be registered under joint ownership?
Yes.
Definitely. Because she's my family.
Okay, good. So now, why don't you apply it as a general rule, as a law in a country that land owned by a married couple should actually be jointly owned land?
My brother, we are not disputing this. What we are talking about is international politics, looking at Africa's land and seeing the next and positioning themselves to colonize Africa again.
But why don't we simply look at Africa first and foremost from inside, from within? Look at ourselves, first of all.
There are people who have a lot of money and who have acquired because of they are politically positioned and or financially well positioned, and they are acquiring this massive land. That's why we need to inform our people. Please, even if you are hungry today, don't just sell your land for very little, because this land is going to grow in value and your family is going to increase in size.
Frank, I have a very disturbing statistic here.
Yes.
Coming out of Uganda, our country, that in Uganda, women own approximately 7% of the land, while, of course, they work on more than 80% of it to provide food and what have you. Is that true?
I'm not sure whether 70% is true, because it requires a very good database in order to estimate it. But the general principle, and to me I can translate it to practice, say that ownership of land by women is really low. It could probably be in the range of between 5 and 15%.
Really?
Pilot
and
language.
Why? And why? Because of culture?
Largely because of culture. And
are these cultures static or are they dynamic?
Cultures are not static, they are dynamic. And actually, the state has a role to play in terms of ensuring that there is equality of ownership in land. And indeed, when you read Uganda's constitution, Uganda's constitution provided for equality of ownership of land by all sexes, men and women.
But is it enforced?
No.
Why?
Even the land law, the Land Act, provides for equal access. But the issue is enforcement. It really needs to be enforced. And that's why I was really pushing hard my brother Bahati that you cannot take it for granted that if a woman is married to a man and the man owns the land, therefore both the wife and the husband own that land. You need to take it further and register that land under joint ownership. Now, what has really failed our country is that they have tended to provide for gender equality in land ownership only through the constitution and land law, but have not touched the laws that provide for marriage, for divorce, and for succession. And that's where they need to move to next.
Unfortunately, once again, time is not our best ally.
Sir, give me 1 minute.
Well, I have to wait. Unfortunately, I can't because before we go, we would be remiss if we did not take a moment to remember Patrick Griswold. He died of cancer earlier this month with his family at his bedside at his home in Ohio. The author of It's Africa Stupid, Patrick helped promote business between Africa and the United States for most of his career. A friend to Africa and all of us here at Straight Talk Africa, he was also named honorary consul to the United States of America for the United Republic of Tanzania. We extend our profound and heartfelt condolences to his family and friends. On that note, thanks to our guest, Jacques Bahati, policy analyst at Africa Faith and Justice Network, Dr. Frank Byamujisha, a former World Bank expert on land reform and currently serves as an independent consultant, and Ms. Arch Manuel El Mawe, Principal Secretary, Kenyan Ministry of Land, Housing and Urban Development, did not make it. Thanks to our affiliate stations, along with our viewers and listeners, we thank you for tuning in. For many of our Voice of America radio affiliates, Learning English is coming up next, and tomorrow morning it's Daybreak Africa with James Bate. On behalf of the Voice of America, thanks for tuning in to Straight Talk Africa. In the meantime, get better, not bitter Africa, and please remember to keep the African hopes alive.